The movies I watched in February. What about them? It was a pretty Oscars-filled month with some franchises, classics, and new releases sprinkled in. I have to say I'm not a critic, I'm just an average movie enjoyer with a personal opinion. So let's get into it. Please help your favorite average movie guy get the 300 subscribers by subscribing right now. Companion, 4 out of 5. My first watch of the month was a cinema visit with Companion, the film about a couple's weekend getaway which takes a terrifying turn. A good way to describe it would be Sex Machina. Ex Machina with sex robots and more humor. It has a killer soundtrack, some very clever scenes, and a wonderful performance by Sophie Thatcher. While Jack Quaid is very Huey, as he is most of the time, the film does however lean a bit too much on exposition and dumb choices by the main characters in order to drive forward the narrative. In the end, it was an unexpectedly entertaining watch in the cinema, albeit a bit spoiled by the massive amounts of trailers released previously. The Apprentice, 3.5 out of 5. Next up I watched The Apprentice on Prime Video. Yeah, the Donald Trump film. Which it is for most of the time. That immediately explains my gripe with this film. Its lack of focus. It has a somewhat interesting story, albeit a bit slow in terms of pacing, and a quite weak second half, but with a couple remarkable and engaging moments, and co-led by two powerhouse performances, it pretty much did the job for me, but not much more. A Real Pain, 4 out of 5. Next up I dived in my Oscars bag with this film that follows mismatched cousins David and Benji as they embark on a tour through Poland to honor their late grandmother. I wanted to see what all the Kieran Culkin fuss was about and I pretty much get it, if it wasn't for a different performance that will come up later. Normally I like a shorter runtime, especially for films like these, but I could really have taken a little more time to get to know the characters, especially because of the subject matter that is beneath all of it. The film is simply just very good at what it does. The dynamic between the cousins is what drives the film and also what gives it strength. It's both funny at times and quite tragic behind the curtain. Avicii, I'm Tim, 4 out of 5. Next up was my most unexpected watch of the month, with the Avicii documentary. I totally wasn't planning on watching it, but it caught my attention on Netflix. I didn't really know much about Avicii, and I still don't really know how to express myself about this documentary, apart from that it kept me hooked and gave me good insight into Tim. But I do believe that it could have gone a bit deeper, but that's obviously sort of halted by the fact that Avicii isn't with us anymore. Finding Dory, 4 out of 5. After watching Finding Nemo earlier, me and my girlfriend went for the sequel that follows the forgetful blue tangfish, as she embarks on a journey to reunite with her long-lost parents. We were extremely surprised. Dory wasn't as annoying as expected. It was very funny and incredibly entertaining, especially the third act. It does hang a bit too much on the previous film, but its new characters are a good addition. I don't like saying that it is better than Finding Nemo because it simply isn't, but it does quite a few things in a better, maybe more interesting way. It is a worthy sequel with a lot of heart, and probably one of the best Disney Pixar sequels there is. Pirates of the Carribean, Curse of the Black Pearl, 4.5 out of 5. Next up was probably my best watch this month, with the film that follows Captain Jack Sparrow as he teams up with Will Turner to rescue Elizabeth Swann. Me and my girlfriend had never seen the franchise before and decided to start. It pretty much is a nearly perfect adventure flick and a great introduction. It has incredible world building, intriguing characters, with a story that is way deeper and more complex than you would expect. It also has some incredible effects for its time, with entertaining stunt work being added to it. The cast is great, especially Johnny Depp puts on an award-worthy performance as Jack Sparrow, although Orlando Bloom's performance is a bit stiff. And you might then ask, why isn't it a 5 out of 5? That's because it's incredibly entertaining, but just slightly too long and drawn out in the last act. Emilia Pérez, 2.5 out of 5. Continuing my Oscar interest this month, I watched the previous Frontrunner, which I really can't understand after watching it. It follows Mexican cartel leader Juan Menendez del Monte, who enlists lawyer Rita Moro Castro to help fake his death and transition into his true self. It is a very interesting premise, something which I had never thought about in my life, which is a big plus. It also started off interesting and engaging, however it ends up being quite ridiculously executed. I can't talk for the trans community, but I have heard the backlash, so I will agree with that as far as I can. It weirdly enough is a musical where most of the songs don't work at all. Instead of adding to it, it could have been way better in a more grounded and dark way instead of it being a musical. The performances here are the perfect description of hit and miss, with most of it not being great, well, really bad, Selena Gomez being especially plainly awful, but with Saldana redeeming some of it. Anora, 4.5 out of 5. Next up, I continued my Oscar journey with the eventual winner, which follows a young Brooklyn sex worker who impulsively marries the son of a Russian oligarch. Let me start off by saying, Igor is the absolute GOAT, to be honest. This film pretty much had it all. It has a little for everyone, but it only exceeds in some of it for me. The middle section feels pretty out of place and drawn out extremely long, while the first half is pretty amazing viewing and not only for the sex scenes. It also runs a little long, but its powerful ending is absolutely worth it. It has especially two killer performances. I didn't really like Edelstein's performance, it felt very over the top to me. But Mikey Madison, and for me especially Yuri Borisov, killed it. Borisov is actually the performance I was referring to in relation to Kieran Culkin. I felt like this was a truly supporting role, whereas Kieran was very much a lead or co-lead. And this one just truly pips it for me by feeling so incredibly real. In general, it's just a great film. I just don't know if it's really best picture great. It just misses that final little something. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, 4 out of 5. Next up we continued the Pirates franchise with the film that again follows Captain Jack Sparrow as he races against time to recover the heart of Davy Jones. This is a sequel in all the good ways and only some of the bad ways. It has great extended world building, fun returning characters, very original action, and some incredibly stellar VFX work. Davy Jones is jaw-dropping to look at from a VFX standpoint. I really can't wrap my head around how good that was to see. However, it also has some unnecessary returning characters, which are pretty annoying or extremely pointless. And while it does stand on its own in general, it ends up having a plot that is very much meant as a setup for the third film, which diminishes its value slightly. Queer, 2 out of 5. Next up, I watched this film that follows American expatriate William Lee in 1950s Mexico City, as he becomes infatuated with a younger man, Eugene Allerton. You might be surprised by this rating. To simply explain it, some films are bad in the Emilia Pérez way, but Queer is bad in the way of boredom. I can take a lot from a film if it keeps me interested and engaged, but this film did all but that. I absolutely adore Challengers, one of the best films of the previous year, but this film just went from intriguing to boring to what the hell am I even watching? Luca Guadagnino wasn't really cooking with this one, and while it is a quite gorgeous looking film, with a great score and good performances, something about it just didn't grab me at all. I was never truly interested and even disinterested at times. This film feels way too long. It is like a short film stretched out by extremely long scenes where practically nothing is happening, meaning to invoke some feeling that wasn't even there for me in the first place. Captain America, Brave New World, 3 out of 5. My next watch was at the cinema with some friends. With the film in which the new Captain America confronts a global threat, while President Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross undergoes personal issues. Let me start off by saying that it was nowhere near as bad as I expected, and weirdly enough is somewhat better as a standalone story. I have to say the first 10 minutes were probably the worst 10 minutes of Marvel content I have ever seen. They were exposition heavy and extremely messy, and I was pretty worried at this moment in time. But soon after it changed into an intriguing and engaging watch that pretty much flew by. The performances were good. Ford has still got it, even though Ross itself was not that interesting of a character. He still kinda gave him some heart, no pun intended. Anthony Mackie does a good job as Cap. However, Ramirez's comedy just didn't land once for me and was thus quite an irritating character in the first act especially. Furthermore, the fight scenes, especially the plane dogfight, were pretty great to see, while the Red Hulk scene was cool as well, although it did fall a bit flat due to its time in the story as well as its conclusion. The CGI was very hit and miss like many Marvel films nowadays, and to be honest it is nowhere near Winter Soldier, but in general, for a film that had this many reshoots, it did feel relatively cohesive for most of the story in the middle. I'm not here to hate on Marvel or to praise them, this is just something mediocre, which isn't as bad as people are saying, but also isn't as good as a lot that has come before it. A Complete Unknown, 3.5 out of 5. My last Oscars watch this month was at the cinema, with the film chronicling 19-year-old Bob Dylan's meteoric rise in the early 1960s New York folk scene. Let me start off by saying I was pretty invested throughout the film. It was an interesting choice to focus on a relatively small portion of this man's life, something I normally don't really like with biopics, but it worked pretty well here. The Newport scenes were a smart way to structure the film and work as a way of showing Dylan's changing personality. However, I do feel that the film is a bit visually bland. Mangold didn't really bring enough sauce to the screen. I did also like the music, but I do feel it was a tad too much. Some of that time could have been used to explore a bit more of Dylan's psyche, because you don't really learn that much about Bob Dylan for a Bob Dylan biopic. Not saying that that is necessary, but something I would have expected. Despite all the good and bad, Timothée Chalamet and Edward Norton are great. Chalamet just really transforms into the role. It ended up being an enjoyable, music-heavy, somewhat surface-level biopic that had my attention throughout. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, 4.5 out of 5. I ended the month with The Appetite for an Oldie, which I fixed with the film that follows an idealistic young senator, Jefferson Smith, who is thrust into the political spotlight and fights against corruption. It was a pretty weird film to start with because the first 15 minutes feel like a totally different film than the rest of it, with weird editing and bad acting, especially from Guy Kibbe, while the rest of the film is a sometimes funny and remarkable, timeless story with acting ahead of its time. James Stewart is wonderful as always, while Jean Arthur pretty much steals the show in a more nuanced way. It changes from a fish-out-of-water story of comedy to a film that is actually saying something pretty important at the time and even today. However, I do feel that the ending does leave a bit to be desired, and comes a bit out of nowhere based on what was shown previously in the characters' actions throughout the film. But I ended up understanding why this film is regarded as a classic of 1930s Hollywood. And that's it for my movie watches this month. I hope you guys enjoyed me rambling about some films I enjoyed or didn't enjoy. And if you did, please be sure to check out my other videos and subscribe for more videos like these. I've been Dean, the average movie guy on your screen. Big thanks for watching, see you next time. Roll the credits.